In the decades following World War I, millions of British schoolchildren learned the story of Nelson at Trafalgar. They memorized his final signal. England expects that every man will do his duty. They reenacted the clash of wooden ships firing broadsides under a brilliant Mediterranean sun. They celebrated the heroic, uncomplicated victory, but almost none of them learned about Jutland. No classrooms recited Beatty's grim warning. No schoolbooks described the burning hulks drifting on a moonless North Sea. No patriotic paintings captured Jellicoe's line of dreadnoughts cutting through mist. The greatest naval battle of the 20th century, the battle that shaped the future of sea warfare, the battle that exposed the weaknesses of the world's most powerful navy, was quietly pushed aside, not denied, not erased, just avoided, as if Britain collectively agreed. Jutland was easier to forget than to understand. But history is never kind to buried truths. And Jutland's ghost would continue to haunt the Royal Navy for decades. To understand why Jutland faded from public consciousness, we must return to the emotions of June 1916. The war was grinding, bloody, and demoralizing. Tens of thousands were dying in France for yards of mud. The home front needed hope, heroes, clear victories. But Jutland did not offer clarity. It offered conflict, confusion, ambiguity. Strategically, Britain won. Germany's fleet remained trapped behind its minefields. The blockade continued. Britain kept its naval supremacy. Tactically, Germany claimed victory. Britain lost more ships, more men, more battlecruisers blown apart. Politically, no one won. The public was angry. The Admiralty was defensive. The government was embarrassed. This made Jutland profoundly inconvenient. It didn't fit the heroic narrative. It didn't inspire confidence. It didn't uplift morale. So, for years, Britain simply stopped talking about it. One naval historian summarized the silence. The greatest battle of the war at sea left Britain uneasy, not triumphant. And uneasy nations rarely immortalize their discomfort. When the war ended, only one of the two key British admirals survived long enough to shape the narrative. Jellicoe died in 1935, respected but never beloved. Beatty lived until 1936, politically influential, charismatic, adored by the press. And Beatty had strong opinions about Jutland. He believed Jellicoe's caution robbed Britain of a crushing victory. He believed aggressive action, not methodical maneuver, was the essence of naval warfare. He believed Jutland tarnished his battlecruisers unfairly. After Jellicoe's death, Beatty's influence on naval culture intensified. He promoted a narrative that emphasized British aggressiveness, German daring, Jellicoe's missed opportunities, his own near-heroic role in drawing the Germans north. But his narrative downplayed the real lessons: flawed British ammunition handling, poor communication, dangerous turret practices, inadequate armor design. In short, the Royal Navy began telling a comfortable story, one that blamed caution rather than systemic failure. This version of Jutland filtered into naval colleges, official histories, and even wartime propaganda in World War II. Unfortunately, it ignored the uncomfortable truth. The Royal Navy's weaknesses were self-inflicted, not circumstantial. Germany, meanwhile, had every reason to publicize Jutland. Their fleet returned home. Their sailors paraded through Wilhelmshaven. Newspapers declared triumph. The Kaiser proclaimed it a glorious victory. But even inside Germany's naval leadership, this celebration rang hollow. Admiral Scheer wrote in his post-war memoir, "The fleet cannot challenge England again. Our losses were too great. Our position is unchanged." The High Seas Fleet had survived, but it was finished as a strategic threat. Germany had won the headlines. Britain had won the war. And yet, ironically, it was Germany's loud celebration that made Britain even quieter. The Admiralty did not want to argue with German propaganda. They wanted to move on. Thus, a strange paradox emerged. Germany remembered Jutland too loudly. Britain remembered it too quietly. History, caught between the noise and the silence, lost interest. Britain had built its naval identity on Trafalgar. Clear conditions, brilliant leadership, decisive action, total victory. Trafalgar was simple, glorious, heroic. Jutland was none of these things. It was confusing, chaotic, technically overwhelming, morally ambiguous, and strategically subtle. The Royal Navy had trained for another Trafalgar. What they got was a modern, mechanized, long-range, smoke-heavy, communications-fragile battle unlike anything Nelson could have imagined. One historian observed, Jutland was the moment Britain learned that the age of Nelson was dead. But Britain was not ready to let Nelson go. Not culturally, not politically, not emotionally. So the Navy and the nation retreated to the comfort of myth. This made Jutland an awkward chapter. It contradicted too many beloved assumptions. Thus, the Imperial War Museum archivist once said, Jutland was too big to ignore, but too painful to celebrate. While Britain diminished Jutland's importance, two nations studied it obsessively. The United States Navy, the Imperial Japanese Navy. Why? Because they saw what Britain refused to confront. Jutland was the blueprint for future naval war. American and Japanese admirals, preparing for conflict in the Pacific, dissected every detail. Long-range gunnery accuracy, flash-fire dangers, night fighting doctrine, destroyer torpedo tactics, armor distribution, command communication failures, fleet maneuvering under limited visibility. It was Japan's Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, who famously said, "Victory belongs to the fleet that learns from Jutland." The Americans went even further. At the Naval War College in Newport, Jutland became a case study for nearly every operational course. Officers spent entire semesters analyzing Jellicoe's deployments and Scheer's turns. One U.S. admiral later noted, "The lessons of Jutland shaped the United States Navy more than any American battle did." Ironically, the battle Britain tried hardest to forget became one of the most important models for navies preparing for the next World War. It wasn't until the 1930s, nearly 2 decades after the battle, that Britain finally revisited Jutland with honesty. Younger officers, unconvinced by Beatty's narrative, pressed for transparency. Naval historians began demanding access to archives. Technical experts called for a re-evaluation of armor and ammunition design. But the damage to institutional memory had already been done. When World War II began in 1939, many of Jutland's lessons had been integrated, but not all. Some, tragically, would be relearned the hard way. Hood's destruction by Bismarck mirrored the fate of Queen Mary and Invincible at Jutland. A flash fire, a magazine explosion, a battlecruiser torn apart. The mighty Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, died because Britain clung too long to the flawed battlecruiser concept exposed in 1916. British forces struggled in night engagements against the Japanese, echoes of the chaotic night actions at Jutland. Early war operations suffered from the same decentralized, confusing signals architecture that hindered Beatty. Britain initially underestimated German U-boats, another expression of the same complacency Jutland had warned against. Nearly every naval historian agrees. If Britain had fully absorbed Jutland's lessons by 1930, Hood might not have been lost. By the 1950s and 60s, as archives opened and historians gained access to primary documents, a new consensus formed. The Battle of Jutland had been strategically decisive, tactically inconclusive, politically damaging, technologically illuminating, historically neglected. It was not a failure. It was not a victory. It was a revelation. Jutland exposed the fragility beneath Britain's naval supremacy. It showed that empires crumble when they mistake tradition for invulnerability. It proved that the future belongs not to the nation with the proudest past, but to the nation that learns the hardest lessons. In the end, Jutland vanished from popular memory, not because it was unimportant, but because it was too important. It challenged myths. It revealed flaws. It humbled a superpower. The Royal Navy emerged from Jutland still dominant, but no longer unquestioned. And that loss of unquestioned supremacy was the beginning of a profound transformation. In the decades that followed, Britain would build new fleets, fight new wars, and redefine its place on the world's oceans. But the echo of Jutland never fully faded. It lives in naval doctrine, in ship design, in the psychology of maritime leadership. Jutland is the battle Britain forgot, and the battle the world could not afford to. Half a century after the guns of Jutland fell silent, divers exploring the cold depths off Denmark found something the world had forgotten. A steel giant, lying on her side in the mud, her hull torn open, her turrets scattered like broken toys. It was the wreck of HMS Queen Mary, one of the 3 British battlecruisers lost in catastrophic explosions during the battle. The divers later reported something eerie. Inside the torn hull, one of them wrote, "The compartments were frozen in time." It was as if the ship still remembered the moment she died. Every twisted beam, every collapsed bulkhead, every melted fragment of steel told the same story. A story the world had spent decades trying not to confront. Jutland was not just a battle. It was the end of an era and the beginning of another. In this final part of the documentary, we explore the deeper legacy of Jutland, how it reshaped navies, influenced wars, rewrote doctrines, and forced nations to abandon the myths that had defined them for centuries. This is the part of the story few documentaries tell, because the real legacy of Jutland lies not in who won, but in what the world learned. At the dawn of the 20th century, navies believed battleships would rule the seas forever. The arrival of HMS Dreadnought in 1906 had set off a global arms race. Nations believed future wars would be decided by massive fleets clashing in daylight, firing broadside after broadside until one side broke. Jutland proved how wrong that vision was. The battle no one could see. Throughout the engagement, haze shifted constantly. Smoke blinded gunnery crews. Misidentification was rampant. Wireless communications were fragile. Range finding was limited or inaccurate. Ships often fired at silhouettes instead of clear targets. It was the opposite of the clean, idealized naval duels predicted by pre-war strategists. A German gunnery officer later confessed, "For much of Jutland, we fired not at ships, but at shadows." If battleships could not see each other clearly in combat, then the entire premise of long-range naval supremacy was flawed. The Dreadnought era, born with so much confidence, began to die on May 31st, 1916. Jutland did not introduce submarines or aircraft into naval warfare, but it demonstrated their growing importance. 1. Submarines, Germany's unseen weapon. Scheer's plan at Jutland included U-boats positioned along anticipated British routes. These submarines failed to achieve decisive results during the battle, but the concept terrified the British Admiralty. If British dreadnoughts could be sunk by submarines far from battle, what good were they? By 1917, Germany shifted toward unrestricted submarine warfare, a decision shaped partly by Jutland's failure to break British sea power. 2. Aircraft. The future arrives quietly. Although aircraft saw minimal involvement at Jutland, the battle exposed the limitations of visibility at sea. Admirals realized that scouts in the sky, able to see over mist and beyond the horizon, were no longer luxuries, they were necessities. One British officer reportedly remarked after the battle, "If only we had eyes in the sky, Jutland would have been a victory by sundown." By World War II, aircraft carriers, not battleships, would become the true capital ships of modern navies. And it began with Jutland. Jutland demonstrated how easily centralized command could break down. Signals failed, reports were incomplete, ships misinterpreted orders. Tactical decisions lagged behind fast-moving events. Post-war naval doctrine shifted toward empowering captains and squadron commanders with greater autonomy. Trafalgar had changed the world because of one man, Nelson. Jutland showed that modern war could not hinge on a single hero. It required coordination, discipline, system reliability, and technological superiority. This realization reshaped officer training globally. Less emphasis on charismatic leadership, more emphasis on analytical thinking, increased focus on technical expertise. Jutland's confusion forced navies to simulate low visibility, disrupted signals, surprise attacks, rapid course changes, damaged equipment. Future fleets would train not for ideal conditions, but for chaos. One of the least known legacies of Jutland is the revolution in naval engineering. Germany's turtleback armor, though imperfect, proved more resilient than British schemes. This forced Britain to adopt new armor philosophies: all or nothing protection, reinforced magazines, improved deck armor against plunging fire, better turret faceplates. The explosions of Queen Mary, Invincible, and Indefatigable horrified naval engineers. They realized cordite was too volatile, flash protection was inadequate, safety procedures were outdated. Britain introduced safer propellants, flash-tight doors, strict ammunition handling protocols, mechanical interlocks to prevent turret mishaps. By World War II, these improvements saved countless lives. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Jutland was psychological: the end of naval arrogance. For centuries, Britain's sailors believed in a simple truth: the Royal Navy cannot be defeated. But Jutland proved British ships could explode, British tactics could fail, British admirals could make mistakes, British technology could be inferior. This forced an uncomfortable reckoning. Admiral Sir Reginald Tyrwhitt later wrote, "We had long believed in our invincibility. Jutland taught us humility. Humility became a strategic asset. It drove reforms, innovation, self-analysis. In a strange way, Jutland's humiliation saved the Royal Navy from complacency. Jutland's lessons prevented, or at least mitigated, several disasters in later decades. Because Jutland exposed the limits of visibility, Britain invested heavily in radar, ultimately deploying some of the world's best naval radar systems by 1941. This helped win the Battle of Cape Matapan, Atlantic convoy battles, North Sea intercepts. British ships faced multiple magazine attacks in World War II, but rarely exploded the way Jutland battlecruisers did. The heavy cruiser HMS Exeter, for example, survived multiple Japanese hits in 1942 because of improvements made after Jutland. 3. Modern naval architecture. Post-Jutland studies influenced the Iowa-class battleships, the Yamato-class, the King George V class, and even Cold War-era cruisers. These designs focused on internal survivability, lessons born directly from Jutland's wreckage. Modern navies still study Jutland. Why? Because its lessons are timeless. 1. Technology can fail at the worst possible moment. Radar, sonar, communication systems all can malfunction under stress. 2. Overconfidence is an enemy. Jutland warns against believing one's own propaganda. 3. Leadership under uncertainty is everything. Jellicoe proved that decisions made in seconds can decide wars. 4. Warfare is chaotic, not predictable. Mist, smoke, miscommunication, unexpected variables shape outcomes. 5. Victory can be misunderstood. Jutland shows how perception can conquer truth and shape history. In the immediate aftermath, Germany claimed victory. Britain doubted itself, but history proved otherwise. Germany's fleet never fought again. It remained bottled up until mutiny broke out in 1918. Britain maintained the blockade. This blockade starved Germany's industry and helped bring the war to an end. Britain remained the dominant naval power. Even damaged, the Royal Navy controlled the seas. Germany scuttled its own fleet in 1919, a silent admission of strategic defeat. The irony is profound. Germany won the battle on paper. Britain won the war on water. Jellicoe, criticized in life, respected posthumously. Modern analysis sees him as prudent and tactically correct. Beatty, popular in life, controversial in history. His aggressiveness cost ships, but also drew Germans north. Scheer, cunning, disciplined, but ultimately powerless to break the blockade. Hipper, brilliant and relentless. His battlecruisers performed superbly. And the sailors? They carried the memories, the fire, the chaos, the fear, the courage. Their sacrifice is Jutland's most important legacy of all. In the end, the North Sea holds the final testimony. The wrecks still lie there. Queen Mary, invincible, indefatigable. Lutzow, Pommern, Wiesbaden, silent, cold, but not forgotten. Each twisted beam tells a story. Each collapsed bulkhead remembers a moment. Each rusted gun still points toward an enemy long gone. The sea does not care who claimed victory. It only remembers the truth. Jutland is not a tale of triumph or defeat. It is a tale of revelation. A moment when the greatest navy on Earth looked into a mirror and saw its future. A future of machines, not myths. A future of strategy, not legend. A future shaped not by Trafalgar, but by the fog, fire, and uncertainty of May 31st, 1916. Jutland was the battle Britain forgot, and the battle the modern world cannot ignore.